What does it mean to be a person? That is the central question, I believe, of the 1966 four-star classic, Flowers for Algernon. Hello from the darkness, comrades. We all know what a person is. A human being. A featherless biped. But we know that it's not enough to just be a human being to be treated like a person. We have words like anthropomorphize, when we treat something that isn't a human being like a person. And we have dehumanize, when we treat someone who is a human like they aren't a person. And today we're talking about Charlie Gordon, a man who begins our story with an intellectual disability, but through surgery and intense training becomes a genius, smarter than any man on earth. When will he be treated like a person? That is the question. Part 1. The world sucks. On his way to genius, Charlie learned many things that have already been made apparent to the reader. That his supposed friends take advantage of him, make fun of him openly, knowing he won't understand, and at best, they pity him. Charlie understands that he's not treated like an equal, but he doesn't see that he's not treated like a friend, like a fellow human being, like a person. After the operation, Charlie improves at his job at the bakery, which he's been given mostly out of pity, and he earns a promotion. He makes suggestions to improve efficiency and proves capable of operating complex machinery and making delicate pastries that he couldn't before. He comes to the realization that one of his fellow workers has been stealing from his boss, and so Charlie threatens to snitch if he doesn't stop. Charlie's good spirit is slowly crushed by his disillusionment and his realization that the world isn't as kind and reasonable as he thought it was. At this point, I think it's important to note that the book does not depict all people with intellectual disabilities as inherently good-natured, pure, and gullible, but rather these are features particular to Charlie, who is by nature positive and hardworking, and perhaps a bit naive. As Charlie becomes smarter, he develops romantic feelings for the woman who had been his adult literacy teacher. He becomes as smart as her, and then even smarter than her, but he still lacks the experience necessary for full emotional maturity. It's not pure intellect that can make someone capable of that kind of heavy relationship. He wants to form a relationship with her, but he is incapable due to past trauma hidden within his subconscious. Eventually he reaches and surpasses the intelligence of the researchers who are running the experiment on him and have been filling kind of a parental role for him throughout the experiment. He's now, at this point in the book, too smart to be in a relationship with his former teacher. As much as he may love her, he is no longer compatible with her. Just as a child comes to learn that their parents are imperfect and often unjust and misguided authority figures, Charlie comes to realize that the researchers, and indeed the whole scientific community, are not as smart as he thought they were, that they are in fact rather petty and guided by narrow-minded self-interest. Charlie also comes to see that the researchers don't see him as an independent person, but as a science experiment and an extension of their own work, kind of an extension of them. They view anything he does as really something they did by proxy. His own parents abandoned him because of his disability after spending years trying to cure him, instead of loving and accepting him as the person who he is. And then, as the smartest person on earth, he finds that he is lonelier than ever, and discovers that he has lost his intelligence. He's not treated as a person by the people running the experiment. He can't maintain a romantic relationship, and he can now no longer maintain the friendships he'd had with the people working in the bakery, the normal people. On his way down, as he loses intelligence, for a time he becomes romantically compatible with his former teacher again, and he does manage to form a relationship with her for a time, but he loses intelligence until it is no longer a viable relationship. He visits the institution where he will likely be forced to live once he is once again intellectually disabled, and he sees the mean treatment and condescension that they treat people with, and he wonders how they treat people who he can't see when he isn't there. I found this part of the story to be particularly compelling, particularly interesting. Well, the idea of becoming a genius is pure fiction. Watching your own cognitive decline with the full understanding that you will lose much of your intelligence is a real experience many people have first-hand experience with, but they also witness. I can't help but think of my own grandmother, who was diagnosed with white matter dementia and who lost her memory and executive function over the final years of her life. She started getting lost easily, couldn't remember things, even when we had just recently talked about them. I remember when I was a teenager, we went to visit her, and she could no longer recognize me. I was told she could no longer recognize any of her grandchildren. She could still, however, recognize my father. And as she told us she was going to swim with Uncle Buster across the river, who had been dead for some 40 years. She did seem happy, though. The next time we saw her, she could no longer recognize my father and had much more trouble engaging in conversation. And the last time I saw her before she died, she could sing along with a tune that my aunt was singing, who'd been her caregiver for many years, but she struggled to answer basic questions like whether she would prefer an apple or a banana. And I do have to wonder what it was like for her in those last 15 years before her death, or even 15 years before, when she was first diagnosed, and she could look ahead at her own decline. My aunt, too, was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She's long said that she wanted to write a book, but she never really put in a lot of effort into it until now, but she's determined to finish that book while she's still capable. And I think obviously about myself, that I may develop dementia or have a stroke like my grandfather did. And I think part of the reason Charlie's treated so poorly as someone with an intellectual disability isn't just because we treat people who are different poorly, and it isn't just because people can reinforce their own kind of sense of self-worth by comparing themselves positively to someone and treating them poorly. I think it's also because he creates a certain fear in some people. It's not just that he has a disability, it's because he's a reminder that you could become disabled too. Institutions for disabled people, even nursing homes, are awful. And I think one of the points of this book here is to make us ask why. Disabled people don't deserve to be treated like they are less than able people. So why do we, as a society, treat them so poorly? I think we often forget, or try to avoid, thinking about the fact that becoming disabled is plan A for most people. We wish that we may live long enough to become disabled because the alternative is simply dying early. I think the fear that people without disabilities have is that they won't be able to do all the things that they love doing, and that they will be treated the same way they treat disabled people now. I think that fear is at the core of why disabled people are treated so poorly to begin with. Now, the case of someone becoming a genius is well outside of the realm of reality, but I do think it's interesting. By becoming unimaginably smart, Charlie threatens our own self-perception. Intelligence is relative, and if all the world were as smart as him, at his height of intelligence, we would become disabled by maintaining our current level of intelligence. Through his superpower, we become disabled by comparison. Someone of normal intelligence has an intellectual disability in a world of geniuses, put simply. It's just as if the entire world had an intellectual disability, it wouldn't be a disability, it would just be normal. Part 2. What do we do? Charlie tries to become smart, even before the operation, and he struggles to learn how to read because it's important to him, and he struggles to work hard. Charlie wants to do the best that he can do, and he treats people well. And a core part of this book is that it's not just the intelligence that we have, but what we do with it. The researcher running the program isn't that smart either. He's insecure, but he's doing his best. he's doing his best to add to human knowledge. Ultimately, we as people, this is really the most we can do. We can't significantly change our intelligence, but we can try to do the most with our intelligence. We can try to understand things and the world around us, and if we do so, we will be using our intelligence better than someone with a greater intellectual capability, but that doesn't use it. We should also think of how we treat people. I view one of the core goals of reading is to expand our empathy, to try to understand and humanize people who are different from us and learn from them, see their perspective. And although this book was not written by someone with superhuman intelligence or an intellectual disability, so it's lacking what I would imagine to be important nuances about the actual experience of either one of those extremes. But I do think it's helpful for humanizing those who are different, especially people with intellectual disabilities who are often dehumanized, locked away in institutions, away from our view, and historically have been tortured, massacred, drugged against their will. Even today, tens of thousands of people with intellectual disabilities are institutionalized in the US alone, and many more are locked away in prisons by a society that has failed them. People with intellectual disabilities are humans. They are people and have the capacity to flourish and add to our society. We should not treat intellectual disabilities as one of the worst outcomes imaginable. While I wouldn't recommend trying to get brain damage, it should not be the biggest fear for our children and for ourselves. I often think of the many people who abort a baby simply because it has Down syndrome. And while I am pro-choice, I have to wonder what that tendency says about us as a society, that we do not think a life with Down syndrome is worth living. And the main character, when he is disabled, shows how someone can try to use their intelligence to the best of their ability to be kind and be a productive member of society. We'd be better off as a society if we strive to treat disabled people as members of our society, as people within it, and not things to be locked away. So while there were no words that I had to look up, I would recommend this book right here to anyone who's curious. And if you'd like to talk about that book, you can do that here. But also, if you're interested in listening to me talk about what words are, you should subscribe for my next video about the 5-star 1996 classic, Frindle. Now, good night. Good day. Good potato.